So I went over the fact that A Hat in Time had this scrapped storyline that was much more serious and elaborate in nature, and was related to Hatadult. As a recap, I'll quickly summarize the events of the previous timeline. The gods of the universe, the founders, created time, and time created the universe as it went on. The founders, unable to directly interfere with the events that concern them, created an order of corporeal beings, capable of feats such as time manipulation and reality warping, known as the Timekeepers. A keeper known as Master Tempest takes a young girl under his wing, known as Pella, for her protection against an impending invasion of her species. The enemies of the story, known as Shadows, destroy most of Pella's species, who desperately plead to the Founders for help. The Founders end up declaring war on the Shadows, and as the number of Keepers start to deplete, and the Keepers discover that the Shadows' possession of a sacred and powerful artifact known as the Sun Piece is dangerous, they order the Keepers to erase these beings from existence. Tempest tells him that he won't do it, telling them that they have the same right to at least exist as the Keepers do, until the Founders reason with him that Pella will continue to be in danger if he does not. After this war, the Keepers and the Shadows are mostly depleted in population, save for Master Tempest and Pella. They manage to capture the Sun Piece and send Pella and Tempest out on a mission of unknown instruction to a graveyard, where they encounter the last Shadow, appearing to be powerless and childlike. Pella offers to kill it, whereupon Tempest tells her not to, and he refuses to kill an innocent creature, naming it Cavis and taking it back home. The Founders are enraged at this, telling Tempest that he went too far. Tempest makes the point that the Keepers and Shadows pretty much killed each other, and in the end, they had the Sun Piece. The Founders do not comment, and allow Tempest to take Cavis under his wing. Cavis is sent through what is referred to as the Ritual of Cleansing, where he gets his hat and is able to go on missions with Tempest and Pella. Tempest takes Pella and Cavis to a place known as the City of Dreams, where Tempest details about an important part of the Keeper's jobs is to go into the dreams of the waking world, but instructs Pella and Cavis never to go into the dreams of the dead, as they could get trapped and wither away into the void. Cavis disobeys this and sees the destruction of his people through the void, confronting Tempest about this and killing him. The Founders alert Pella of this as Cavis escapes, and bestow the title of Master upon her, telling her to hunt him down and bring him back alive. Cavis steals the Sun Piece and manages to bring about Time's End, a cataclysmic event involving the destruction of the universe and the reality around it. During the confrontation between Pella and Cavis, he defeats Pella and explains that he stole the Sun Piece so he could go back in time and stop the day where he and Pella met, so no one has to die. He then leaves the timeline, realizing the process is too far along to stop. Pella, however, survives and leaves the timeline as well. The whole timeline is revealed to be a withering Cavis speaking to Hat Kid, or Henny, and explaining that the timepieces, or the Sun Piece, brought destruction to the previous timeline and he will cease to exist soon, hoping that Hat Kid will be more responsible with the timepieces than he was. He then hints that Pella is in fact still alive and about in the timeline. Now the question comes about. What is Pella doing in Hat Kid's timeline, and why did her appearance change? What was her original role, and why was all of this scrapped? Now, I can only guess with most of what I'm about to go over, and unlike the previous video, I can't bring about a lot of evidence to support what I say either. But here goes. I mentioned a number of things about Pella in the previous video. One, that she survived that timeline's destruction, and Cavis knew that she was alive before essentially fading out of existence. I find something about this strange, however. One, Cavis knew that Pella was alive despite leaving before she did, and two, despite being in possession of the Sun Piece, he never succeeded in correcting the timeline or healing his soul with it. The latter is easily explainable, since there's no mention of Cavis actually completing his training as opposed to Pella, who did complete hers and earned the title Lady Pella. He made the same mistake as Mustache Girl and didn't know how to use the timepieces properly, thus bringing about Time's End. I do have an explanation for the former thing, however. I believe that this alternate cut storyline is not only how Henny met Cavis, but also how she obtained the timepieces in the first place. We all have one question, which is about Henny's past, how she got the timepieces, etc., etc. But the last cutscene containing dialogue of Cavus speaking to Henny may answer this question.
Listen, when you leave this place, I will return to the darkness. I will cease to exist. That power you hold, in my timeline, our pieces brought ruin to the world. Perhaps you will be wiser. Use the power for the right things. At least for the things you believe in. So long as we're remembered, the fire will never burn out.
As for Pella's intentions with Henny, I think Pella either planned to take the timepieces from her and reconstruct the Sun piece, restoring it to the Founder's control, assuming they even exist in this timeline, or make sure that Henny didn't misuse them for something stupid. My best evidence to suggest that Pella and Henny are two different people is not only the fact that Cavus mentioned that Pella was the one in the video who looked like Henny, and she was about in the timeline, but an unused texture known as the Moonstone. So what stands out to me here more than anything is the fact that Henny and Pella are shown as separate people. This also presents another possibility of exactly how the story was going to go down. I think, based on the gameplay as Pella, that she intended not to let Henny know of her presence, and operate non-violently in her shadow. Pella could not attack, jump, run, or otherwise during this gameplay. This might also be a nod to the fact that these confrontations in the previous timeline were not physical fights. Most likely, Pella was intended to investigate as well as introduce this gameplay mechanic. As for exactly what the story is behind this scrapped part of the story might be, involving Pella and Henny, I have no idea, other than the fact that they were not hostile towards each other. Although I can get into some kind of guess. But I have to make a few points first. Now for the next point, I want to tell you that I did some digging in the base game, up to date of course. I have a couple more points to make here. After this one, at least. There's a setting, or rather a place, that I found that's used in both timelines. So I'm going to play two clips. One is me using the console to clip out of bounds and explore, and the other is a scene from the previous timeline. But Logan, you're stupid. People reuse assets from their game all the time. You can't seriously be implying that they kept that in for some reason. But I am. Allow me to shed some light on why this is important. In the previous timeline, this is an important event, where you have two suns that stabilize into what is called the sun and the moon. Now guess what stabilizes them? The sun piece. So assuming in the next timeline over, the whole thing starts new, right? Because time came to an end in the previous one, it would only be natural to assume that it resets somehow if we now have it in this one, right? Right. So without the sun piece, the stabilization could not occur. This also points to something interesting. The shadows existed in this timeline, as did the keepers and the founders. Most importantly, as it wouldn't make any sense for there to be a sun or timepiece in existence in the first place. Now we can answer a question from the previous video. How did Henny come into contact with Cavus, and why did she? You see, I did a lot of digging and total OCD analyzing and assuming. I used both the camera badge and the command prompt to find a various assortment of drawings left by Henny in the hidden places of the game. It appears that sometime in the scrapped second story, shown in the alpha and beta, Cavus was the main villain. I also might want to point out that there is a picture of Henny with Pella, inside the blue chest she has in her room, traversing along with the sun, accompanied by that same moon off picture. So what is my guess about exactly what happened in the second scrap story? Pella, after time's end, flees into the next timeline in hot pursuit of Cavus, who is after the timepieces. The founders ask Henny, who is identical to Pella, as it is a parallel timeline, to go retrieve the timepieces for them so that the situation doesn't get out of control. Pella sees this as an opportunity to go after Cavus, and assumes a different appearance after waiting an amount of time, as not to be confused with Henny, who at the time of Pella's entrance had not left home yet to be a keeper herself. Henny, after growing at least a little, is sent out to deal with the issue. She goes to her usual places and eventually meets Pella maybe towards the middle to end of the story, where they explore the time rifts and fight off Cavus as he distorts time and brings about enemies from both timelines after them, along with using Pella's reality warping power to counter Cavus, bringing about time's end again. Pella and Henny are separated, and Henny, as Cavus dies, is left to listen to the story of what really happened, and is given the remaining timepieces, surrendering and recognizing his mistakes for the past actions. As for what happens to Pella after this, I can only guess. Assumedly, Henny and Pella corrected both timelines and reset everything, leaving Henny to retry her adventures, with nothing but a memory of a best friend through a barely remembered dream. So it's entirely possible that Pella faded away, never meant to exist at all.